Welcome, one and all, to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan. It's my joy to serve as the minister here. I'm Pastor Isabel Call. Welcome, welcome. We envision ourselves as a vibrant, inclusive congregation, widely known as a safe haven and a force for social justice. We welcome you, visitors and newcomers. Please chat with us after the service, and our greeter, Jessica, here in the building, and Linda, our Zoom host online, are especially available to answer any questions. There will be a time later in the service when we share our joys and sorrows. If you're here in person and want to get us start writing them down, you'll find some paper in a box nearby. As we begin, we acknowledge that we live, work, and worship on the traditional homelands of the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee peoples, lands which were also home to Indigenous peoples forcibly removed from elsewhere, and where now no original peoples retain sovereignty and legal authority. We feel the land under our bodies and acknowledge the people who belong here as we recommit to lives and livelihoods that bring forth justice and equity. So Sandy and I have just a little presentation for you. Last week, if you were here, you were a part of the first stage of our generosity project, where we shared with each other what it is that we see in all of our members. Today, in your virtual order of service, the email that you got a link to a document that includes everything that everybody shared, as well as a nominations form. So we're asking you over the next 8 days to click that nominations form and nominate members of this congregation for the various openings we have to be of service here. So you'll find in that email the nominations form, as well as our new process guide, which describes what we do and how we do it. So I'll also take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker today, Tai Amri Spann-Ryan. He is Lawrence's 2016 Langston Hughes Poetry Award recipient and a co-founder of the collaborative group Black Lawrence. Black is Black Literature and Arts Collective of Kansas, where he organizes events and readings. He has served as an assistant and youth pastor at progressive and opening and affirming churches, including our friends at First Congregational here in Manhattan. And he's a dad. In 2018, Tai Amri completed training as a facilitator for Our Whole Lives, a curriculum created by the Unitarian Universalist and United Church of Christ communities to provide holistic sex education. And today he'll talk with us about why sex education must be anti-racist to be truly holistic. And as you're integrating what he shares today and any discussion we have afterward, I also invite you to check out the brand new bulletin board we have that Sandy's put together in the hallway, all about the Our Whole Lives curriculum. And so now Tai Amri will be leading our Time for All Ages. So I invite the young and the young at heart. If you'd like to come down, you can sit on the carpet here on the floor or climb up on our pilings here. Me too. There it is.
Hello, thanks for that introduction, Pastor Isa. So again, my name is Tai Amri, and I am going to be sharing a story by one of the greats of Black history, Bell Hooks. And the name of the story is Skin Again. The skin I'm in is just a covering. It cannot tell my story. The skin I'm in is just a covering. If you want to know who I am, you've got to come inside and open your heart way wide. The skin I'm in looks good to me. It will let you know one small way to trace my identity. But then again, the skin I'm in will always be just a covering. It cannot tell my story. If you want to know who I am, you've got to come inside. Be with me inside the me of me, all made up of stories present, past, future. Some true to life and others all fun and fantasy, all the way I imagine me. You can find all about me coming close and letting go of who you might think I am. Before you come inside and let me be real, and you become real to me. All real then, in that place where, but not skin again is one small way to see me, but not real enough to be all the me of me or the you of you. For we are all inside, made up of real history, real dreams, and the stuff of all we hope for when we can be all real together on the inside. Thank you. So this is one of the first times that I've been preaching without my family here. My 9-month-old is cutting teeth right now, so she's her mood fluctuates a little bit, and my wife is a little relieved to be at home, but I have a hard time not putting her in my talks, and I'm thinking about her right now. She practices traditional Chinese medicine, and she talks about the new year being, this year being the Chinese year of the dragon. And I don't know if you all have been experiencing dragon-like energy, but I have this week. My body decided that it was going to reject coffee, which I am a great lover of coffee and drink 3 to 4 cups a day. So I have not had coffee for about 3 or 4 days. So this was an interesting process for me. Let me just say that, please. So I wanted to open up singing a song that I often sing before I speak. Spirit of the living one, fall afresh on us. Spirit of the living one, fall afresh on us. Mold us, melt us, fill us, use us. Spirit of the living one, fall afresh on us. So good morning and alafia. Alafia is a term of greeting meaning peace in the Yoruba language and tradition that I practice. It occurs to me that there's a reading that I was going to do. I don't know exactly where the script is. I don't have the script up here, so. Is it up on the screen? Good. I'm glad it's on the screen. So I wanted to begin this talk with a reading of a few definitions. I don't like, I'm a poet, so I like to break the definition usually, but sometimes when having difficult conversations, it can be helpful to have an agreed upon definition or something that we're like, we're breaking. We know what rules we're breaking. The following are three definitions that I'd like us to consider for today's reflection. The first is an anti-racist, which according to Ibram X. Kendi, is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy that produces or sustains racial equity between racial groups through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. The second definition is by Reggie Williams, who defines white supremacy as the manufacture and maintenance of systems and structures for whites only. The invention of whiteness is an act of violence, a process of organizing human life around an ascendant type. And the third is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who defined peace thusly: true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. So I appreciate being here on what I call Black Future Month. I love Black history. I start every day praying and meditating on the legacy of our ancestors. But I'm at a place in my life where I want to create my own legacy that looks to a future where Black, Indigenous, and people of color do not have to struggle so much for basic rights. As you can see from today's readings, I plan on focusing today's reflection on anti-racism and what it can bring to sex education. The work of dismantling white supremacy, upholding anti-racist ideals, and maintaining true peace requires a willpower and a fortitude possessed by few. In fact, the majority of white Americans would rather ignore or legislate away this topic altogether. But then to add the extra layer of one of our most taboo topics, sex, sexuality, and gender, means the presence of anyone here today is a miracle. Thank you for having the courage to attend today's reflection. I'd like to start by telling you a little of why I'm the one standing in front of you today. So as said before, I'm a father and an educator, a poet, a mystic, a cisgender queer Black man, and a transplant from the stolen Lenni Lenape land of Jerseydelphia. Being born in 1980 in a small suburban town of Philadelphia, sex ed was rarely taught explicitly. I was also raised Quaker, so talking in general wasn't a high priority. I did a lot of listening to spirit, but not a lot of explaining and questioning aloud what I saw around me. I'd like to say that I did not receive a lot of messages about sex until high school, because that's when I began to question it and receive distorted answers. But that would not be true. In fact, much of what I learned about sex before high school stays with me to this day. Before adolescence, I witnessed many of my Black peers engaged in non-consensual fondling and groping. I was very shy and timid in my younger years. And while I didn't engage, I did not feel any sort of superiority. In fact, I thought there was something very wrong with me. In the majority of the rap music I listened to and the videos I watched, Black men were always wanting and scheming to have sex, and Black women were always sexy and seductive. The fact that my fantasies and desires revolved around having children and a family meant that my narrative seemed completely invisible. Of course, at the time, I thought that no one could have experienced anything remotely similar to what I experienced. Once I became an educator, I realized that this was far from true, and that the majority of us receive extremely faulty information around sex, or we receive no information at all when we really need it. I've witnessed boys who thought they had to lie about their exploits in order to be accepted, but who didn't even know the basics of contraception. I've witnessed girls who would allow themselves to be videoed on camera phones to be accepted, and queer children who walked with shame and fear through the halls of schools and down the sidewalks to their doors. Students like Next Benedict, the 16-year-old two-spirit teen from Oklahoma, was jumped in the bathroom by a group of girls and died the next day. The police are saying that Nex's death was not due to trauma. I disagree. Whether or not a group of bullying children can be charged for murder, trauma was involved in their death. I've seen this trauma too often in my classrooms. Students who know who they are, but have their classmates tell them differently, have their teachers misgender them, have their parents disown them, or students who are just trying to figure it out. Yesterday, while working on this reflection, I was contacted about one such student. They had the kind of neurodivergence that made social interactions almost impossible. They rarely looked anyone in the eye, and conversations were difficult as they would rarely answer, and when they did, understanding their train of thought required patience. Still, one thing they could say for sure was that they were non-binary. I believe in sharing the full truth with young people, but in this situation, I really hope that they hadn't heard of Nex. I want to hope that the fact that they took their own life yesterday had nothing to do with Nex. But the way social media is abuzz with the news, I doubt it. That there is so much suffering because of our lack of will and love is infuriating. It should be obvious that all children need holistic sex education, especially Black and trans kids. The kind of sex education with roots at least as deep as a UU curriculum about your sexuality, which has been around since the 70s, when Kinsey reported that deviant sexuality was widespread. A sex education that is at least radical enough to look at how sex positivity can be commercialized and proposes what UU's called a new morality, one based in situation ethics, where the right or wrong of a sexual act could not be determined by the type of act alone. Love mattered, emotions mattered, individuals' values and beliefs mattered. A sex education that understands that technology poses at least as big of an obstacle as the rise in the abstinence-only programs in the 90s. And that just as members of the Unitarian Universalists and the United Church of Christ knew they had to join forces, we understand again that all people who believe holistic sex ed is a right need to combine forces. It is my understanding that the UU 8th principle, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions is a new and somewhat controversial principle. I believe debating all ideas are important, even when the majority holds one perspective over another. Today, there is growing anti-woke sentiment, anti-trans laws, anti-Black history and future curriculum, and a move towards Christian nationalism that legitimizes Christian-only thinking and leadership. Because of the world we live in, to be neutral is to be on the side of the oppressor. To ensure that we aren't complicit, intersectionality is essential. In the wheel of power and privilege, intersectionality recognizes that there are many aspects of our identities that inform our experiences of power or marginalization. These aspects of our identity consist of gender, citizenship, skin color, formal education, ability, sexuality, neurodiversity, mental health, body size, housing, wealth, religion, spirituality, and language. We have an understanding of how these aspects of our identity influence our power and privilege, but one thing we often forget is the other side of the equation. Anthroposophical philosopher Sven Sars points out that privilege has a disability, an inability to see and have empathy for those who have a marginalized identity. In our culture, disabilities usually prevent individuals and communities to prosper. However, a privileged disability prevents others from prospering. For example, having dark skin means that I know intimately what anti-Blackness does to the mind, the soul, and the spirit. However, being cisgender means that I require trans folks to understand their needs and perspectives. In essence, our whole lives curriculum has the basis for intersectional thinking. The values it upholds, self-worth, sexual health, responsibility, and justice and inclusivity, lay out the principles needed. However, if leadership and participants are all white, then this is problematic. I find Dr. King's definition of peace helpful because what we look for in peace is not an absence, but a presence. It's the same way with racism. What we look for is not the absence of racism, but the presence of equity. So let's look at what equity could be in sex education. In our whole lives curriculum, the education is split into 3 categories: early childhood, elementary, and middle school and high school. If I took one theme from each category, I might have the theme of families in K through 3rd, identity in 4th through 9th grades, and understanding yourself in 10th through 12th grades. The messages around families in Black communities are often portrayed as being fatherless and broken. For me, when I fantasized about having a family, I thought there was something wrong with me. The reality is that studies show Black fathers tend to be more present with their children than their white counterparts. Without representation of Black fathers and families and images and examples, we do a disservice to Black children who want families and non-Black children who might benefit from examples of Black parenting. The messages around identity for Black boys are still steeped in fear and demonization. It is difficult to construct any other identity when so much of your energy is spent trying to prove you aren't a thug. When I helped to run our school's queer club, I never saw a Black boy present in our meetings. The pressure to be ultra masculine in the Black community is still immense and is projected not just from the Black community, but from media and leadership. What happens when we portray Black youth as being on all parts of the gender and sexuality spectrum. Finally, understanding yourself in the 10th, 12th grades holds a similar difficulty because the media images of what it is to be young and Black are so frequently hypersexualized. What happens to the Black teen who has little or no interest in sex or sexuality, or faces the disparity of abstinence-only education? When I was a Black teen, I attended a Christian school that taught me that not only were sexual acts deemed sinful, sexual thoughts were as well. And so to this day, I experience guilt for having any sexual desire. What happens to that teen who is just discovering the horrors of racial inequity in the medical system? Black teens go into a world with rising rates of STIs and rising mortality rates for cervical cancer. What would happen if we shared voices of Black teens who are not interested in sex, who do not put their bodies first, whose sexuality is married to love, and who have found ways of navigating their health that uphold their principles? I believe it is possible with an intersectional framework for sex education. We can create a curriculum that addresses the needs of the marginalized. Equity, though, means that the barriers are taken away. There is full representation of all identities, and there is not just an absence of racism, phobias, and discrimination, but the presence of multicultural leaders and participants. May we move towards a world where this is so. Thank you.
So I would love to open our time of discussion with gratitude to you for your words, and especially your song at the beginning, which helped me land. And I'm really interested in, for all of us, how we balance this, the will, finding our will to be not just not racist, but anti-racist, and then also the receptivity of letting the Spirit fall on us. So that was something that stood out to me at the beginning. And I'm also had to write it down, this understanding that our identity leads to the power and privilege we have, and that privilege is a disability that doesn't disable us, but disables others. And I'm curious how that's landing for other people here, and what examples you have of the way that works in your lives and how you interact with others. Those are some thoughts I have, and I'll open up the floor, and I know Tai Amri is available to answer questions as well.
So I really appreciated your comments. I think to the point about privilege preventing us from seeing, I was sort of thinking about one of the many books that has been banned this past year, All Boys Aren't Blue, that I have my students read a portion of. And the part of that memoir that gets quoted by lawmakers as obscene is when the protagonist is describing his first experience of sex being non-consensual, right? As a queer Black boy, people picking up on the fact that he's queer, and predators, right? In this case, a family member taking advantage of that. And so many kids' first experience is, especially maybe queer kids, and maybe we can talk about then how race and class intersect there. That first experience is one of trauma, but that the senators reading that book, all they see is a sex scene, and not a scene where this person is describing being assaulted, right? And so that was just one example of like privilege blinding us to really see from different perspectives and have empathy. And kids not being able to read that book is preventing them from naming maybe assault, right? Or being better able to recognize that that experience was something that was not okay. So I was grateful for the opportunity to think of that. And I don't know if you've read that book, but it sort of reminded me of some of what you were discussing today.
One thing that you're making me think about is that there is a banned book, not that one, that comes to mind, and I always get the title wrong, so help me. I think it's The True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I think that was something around that, it's by a Native American author who's queer, but the reason why it's banned is because of a quote about liking masturbation. And when I think of my own high school training, I needed that book because when I was talked to from my youth leaders, they were like, no, masturbation is evil, it's a sin. And the guilt still follows. It's exactly that. It's exactly like, what are we taking out of the lives of young people when we ban these books? We don't understand the full ramifications of them unless you've grown up in that world. You really don't. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a beautiful sharing. I was thinking about how, I don't know how many people here who were like, how long ago was it? Like 6 years when we were really trying again to get that racist mascot at MHS high school changed. And you had this group of people who had assembled all this research, this peer-reviewed, really in-depth studied research that showed the damage that it does, the evidence, testimonials from students, examples of students who were in the school system writing racist things on the polls about whether or not it's racist to have the mascot. You have people coming up and saying, we're hurting, please stop. And there was the gentleman who was the son of Coach Printup, I don't remember what his name is, but he got up there and he said, anybody who feels hurt by this wants to feel hurt. And he got a round of applause and people were standing up and applauding that. The idea that the pain that they were experiencing was just because they wanted to be victims. And it made me think, this is making me think about there's a difference between like a passive sort of privilege, like that lack of awareness, and then that when awareness is drawn and then you're able to shift and grow, and then like an active sort of avoidance of accepting the reality of your privilege and the pain that you're causing other people. And it's that active, intentional, like, we are not going to be empathetic. We're not going to be, and I struggle with that so much because you can't debate with that. You can't share, you can't love somebody out of that. But I'm not saying that there's an alternative to loving, but I don't know. I just get stuck there in that moment when this man was saying this awful thing and he had this gymnasium full of people applauding him for saying this really cool thing. It just, I don't know. I feel like a part of me shut down and didn't know how to ever get past that.
I was a youth pastor at that time, so I remember that. I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but like I said, I'm a transplant. I'm not from here, but I notice it in Quaker circles too. Quakers were really big in abolition. And so we have a tendency to be like, well, we were the first abolitionists, and that means we don't have to do anything anymore, right? So, and I noticed that in Kansas, there's a really strong, it's also abolition, it's a really strong free state identity. And sometimes I live in Lawrence, and I think that there's a Lawrence hubris. I think that it's a hubris that thinks that because we have this past, we can just say John Brown, and then we don't have to do anything about the present. And so that's part of why I'm starting to embrace Black Futures Month, because I just am like, I'm so tired of talking about what you did in the past. What are you doing for the future? So yeah, that's a big one. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Judy Nicholson. It's taken me all of 70 years to build the empathy that I finally have. I feel like I can identify with some of what people feel. Tears come to my eyes when you tell a story. I work with young men, and I want to know how to teach that empathy, or, and if anybody here has any ideas about that, I would really appreciate that.
My son is trans, and I appreciate your advocacy on that. I know politically things are getting kind of scary. Because it's not just the lack of social acceptance. It's, my son working at Walmart and people coming up to him for absolutely no reason and making comments, I hear most of it. And I think a lot of people, when they come to me, they're like, oh, you're a cis woman and you're the mother of this child. Certainly you understand, and I'm like, no. Like, I support my son, unfortunately, for you, and so, like, I hear, even when people have that mask of being nice, in that background, they're still going to other people like, oh my gosh, so I think the advocacy, even with perceived niceness, is still important moving forward, and I thank you for that. I do kind of feel like I want to address something with this congregation, if that's okay, because this is my second time being here, and I appreciate you being here. I noticed that after you had done your poem, it was quiet. I wanted to clap, but I'm new, so I was like nervous when like nobody else was clapping. And then when she got done with her music, people clapped. And then again, when he got done with his story, I wanted to clap. I thought that was a normal thing to do, but it got quiet. If I could take a moment, I want to clap for you. So thank you. And thank you.
My name is Sylvia Beeman. Well, maybe I'd just interject that Quakers own slaves, and from reading Kendi's book, I think I understood that the Mennonites were the only group who came here who actually were anti-racist. And so, anyway, it's just we're all such a mixed bag of our prejudices. And anyway, but what I wanted to say is, thank you for speaking out. We have a trans grandchild who's only 10, and she told me when she was 2 that she was a girl. So my heart was gripped with fear when my daughter sent a picture that I should have been joyous about, but it was a picture of her going to her first dance at her school with her sister, who's 2 years older, who was biologically and presents as girl. They were both wearing makeup and they looked so happy, but I fear for the suffering that my grandchild is probably just entering into. And I'm glad she doesn't live in Kansas.
Thank you, Sylvia. Sarah.
I'd just like to add that I think the indigenous view is so wise because they accept everyone and they have the two-spirit people. So I think we're all being tremendously gifted by these powerful souls who have a different gender identity and are trying to lead us into honest, true acceptance of each other. And we need to protect them and celebrate them and do everything we can to let them know that they're a gift just like everybody else. So thank you so much for this topic today.
Thank you, Diane. I see Emily has a hand up.
Yes, I'm Emily. And I just wanted to say that when it comes to the concept of privilege being a disability, that yes, it disables others, but I think it's a disability for the people experiencing it as well, because it's privilege is essentially, it's the ability to thrive without actually having, and while actively denying your humanity and refusing to engage in empathy with yourself or anybody else, really. Like when I think about the stories of like what you shared, when people say your feelings aren't real or that your identity shouldn't exist, or if you feel like you have to hide or deny any aspect of your identity when we're talking about intersectionality, if some part of your identity gives you the privilege of being able to hide that, for example, and not be true to yourself or anybody else about it, or just gives you the ability to be able to survive without having to face what it is to be human, I think that is a disability.
Thanks, Emily. I'm appreciating this discussion and conversation, and also noticing that one of the key themes that you've brought to us is, well, one of your gifts is talking about your own experience as a Black person and as a father, and it's not something we're talking about very much, about Black History Month today or Black Futures, and just acknowledging, you said the opposite of racism is multicultural leadership and presence, and we can see that we lack that, and so acknowledging that here and acknowledging it in the conversation, and just deep gratitude for your willingness to bring that to us and bring that into our conversation. May we meet that as well as we grow into Black futures. I think there might be one more comment and then we'll shift. Oh, we didn't check on Zoom. Are there folks on Zoom who want to speak also? You can put a note in the chat and we'll see it here.
I actually had a question.
Yeah, Linda.
You commented that Black young boys and men are expected to be very masculine, hyper-masculine, sexual. Are teenage girls expected to be especially like sexy? Is there pressure in the Black community for that?
I think that hypersexuality is a problem in all of representation of Black people. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that I could say it's boys and girls, but it's non-binary Black children too. also, and youth also experience that hypersexualization at a young age, and especially, unfortunately, in the school system, they are rarely seen, they're mostly seen as perpetrators, which I see that as a problem of hypersexuality and sexualization. So yeah, that's a problem across gender lines in the Black community.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
So what brings me here is that I am the new safety manager for the school bus company that serves Junction City. I've been a school bus driver for 20 years prior to that, and I've had a lot of experience with intervening when things happen on the school bus, which is quite often. And I heard a question about how to handle things when, you know, you're working with a group of people that might be insensitive. And one of the things, one of the tools that you can do is rehearse in your mind prior to, you know, like when you're, you know, cooking or whatever in a neutral environment, how will I react if I experience XYZ? And although this was not a racist or a gender-based thing, something happened on my bus on Friday, because I do get put out on a bus when they're short drivers, and they're very short drivers. So, you know, I go out and I drive the bus. They were calling a kid on the bus obese, and they were making fun of this child's weight. So I grabbed the microphone and I said, "What's the problem with being obese? I'm obese." And the kids were like, "Oh, you're not obese." I said, "Yes, I am. By every metric, I am obese. But you know what? I have body positivity, and I'm okay with the way that I look. So what's the problem?" And so I actually got a round of applause from the entire bus of middle schoolers. So part of what we need to do is rehearse in our mind, and before we're thrown in that situation, think of, if I hear certain words or whatever, how am I going to respond? If I hear somebody, you know, talking about, you know, people that are not, that are non-binary, then, you know, I challenge them on the bus, you know, what's the issue? How does this affect you? You know, why do you care? And it usually shuts that down. So we, like Dr. King said, it's, you know, peace is not just the absence of, you know, the conflict, it is the presence of justice. And when we stand up, when we say to people, what is your problem? What is it that, you know, how does this affect you? This is somebody else's personal life. And how does this affect you? And we challenge them on that, and we challenge them on, you know, and make them feel like what they're doing is socially unacceptable, then that has an effect on them.
Thank you, Angie.